All right, so in this video, we're going to be baking a high poly to a low poly, or a bunch of selected objects to an active object. So we're going to keep it real simple here. We're actually going to have to model something first. In this case, I'm just going to take the default cube and go into edit mode, scale it out real quick. Let's add a bevel modifier to this. Generally speaking, you want to model your high polys first. So this bevel modifier, I'm just going to bump it up to like a count of 12 and change the outer emitter to arc. I'm going to press, actually we can duplicate this, right click. We have a duplicate of it. We can remove the bevel, go into edit mode, and we can scale this in a little bit. I'll pull it out right here. I just want to line it up so while orbiting, hit Alt. And I'm going to go ahead and go into edit mode. And normally you don't want to scale in object mode. If you do, press Control A and apply scale. These need to be at once for the bevels to be nice and clean. But we're going to make something like a safe, more or less. And so we'll go ahead and do that real quick. Let's pull this out right here. Okay. And so this one, we're going to do a Boolean from this to this. So select this, hold Shift, select that. Under Edit Preferences Add-ons, enable Bool Tools. Under the Bool Tools options, turn on Show Wireframe. Then you can press Control-Shift-B. You can use Bool Tool and do a Brush Boolean Difference, or use Control Numberpad Plus. And you can cut out like so. You can see what we get here. This shape here, actually, I'm going to hit Alt-Z so I can select this back face. I'm going to hit I to inset. We're going to do a really small inset here and hold Control and pull it out. So we inset and hold Control, and that's it. So we got something like this going on now. We could pull this out further so it becomes flat again here at the surface, right? See how that works? Now this is good because what we want to do is we want to bevel these edges a good little bit here. And so we can do this manually. Just Alt clicking on an edge, Alt selecting it, should I say? If it'll let me select again, that'd be great. I don't know why it's not working here. Okay, this is what we're looking for, just loop all the way through. And we're going to go ahead and go through that. Now we want to bevel here quite a bit. But the trick about this one is we need to mouse wheel up. We're doing this destructively, so we won't have an option to change this later. Sometimes it's good to do this more than you think you should. So I'm going to use 14 segments. So it's nice and smooth. And that'll give us this shape here now. Okay. The reason for this is because this little edge here, we need to bevel that. We're going to do it on the main object though. So you see we have bevel, boolean, and then now we can do another bevel right here on top of it. And we have to change the outer emitter to arc again. In this case, we're going to change the profile. You can play around with profiles, but 0.7 works really well for hard surfaces. And we can play around with the bevel amount here a little bit. Okay, hold Shift to move it in smaller increments. Let's go ahead and hide this. Press H. Select it. Press H, and now I can bump up the segment count here as well. Probably more than you think you need. In this case, I'm going to use 8. So this shape here, if I shade it auto smooth, right click shade auto smooth, you'll see it doesn't shade here. The actual cutter needs to also need to be shaded auto smooth, and that will shade it appropriately, right? So there we go. Now we have kind of the start of a safe going. And we can continue cutting into this. We can create more cubes. We can go through the same process for the most part and run through here and start knocking this out however we see fit. So maybe we need like a little keypad or something. Sometimes you might want to go outwards and not inwards with the booleans, right? And so you'll do a join instead. This particular one, I'm going to run it to the surface, intersect it like so. Maybe in this area. Go ahead and scale it up a little. I want it to be extremely flat like that. And I'm going to end up, we could just leave it here. We don't have to actually attach it. We could just bevel it if we wanted. We don't have to use a boolean on it. Could just do this number. The problem here is that if we take a look at up here in solid, matcap, you can turn this on. This is what you can expect out of your normal map here. This might be okay, but in games, generally it doesn't look that good. You might want to add a a simple deform and taper to it. It's going to make it do this number. And you can play around with the tapering amount, but you can see it's kind of tapering weird. It goes off of the origin point of the object. So if I was to just turn this off for a second, that origin point's way out there. So do object set origin, origin to geometry. This might work out quite a bit better now. And we could taper it like so. Play around with the values here. In this case, you see how we can start to influence it like this. That's going to look better in a game environment. Okay. And we can also modify this a little bit more because we're using it something like a floater right now. Okay. And so we can even scale that in maybe a little bit here on the inside. And hold Alt while orbiting, you can jump into these side views, which is, it's looking pretty good. Alt click, and then you could do select loops rings, Control B. You can bevel this area if needed as well. It's not going to be the prettiest of bevels. I should have did that first before we started doing the other things, but Alt Z, get back out of that. There we go. So yeah, we can do this. That's cool. And it'll be part of the high poly here. Let's go ahead and add a couple other little elements real quick. I'm going to kind of fly through these ones since we got the idea of what's going on here. And let's go ahead and do this. We can place the origin point back to the geometry here. Pull this one out. I'll place it at the surface and just scale it non-uniformly. Control A, apply scale. And now we can do another bevel. Bump it up more than I think I need it. And something like that real quick. I think this one will be fine like this. So we can shade it auto smooth, shade auto smooth, shade auto smooth. All right, last but not least, let's do a cylinder. And go ahead and do the same thing here. We're gonna make another floater, basically. So let's bring this one in like so. I'm gonna press E and extrude it out. Scale it in like this. E, S, E, S, just like that. Shade auto smooth. We're gonna bevel it. Okay. And just a little bit here on this one. Bump up the segment count. See what we can get going on. All right, so you may want to actually leave these as pieces of a mesh if you're doing a more detailed version of a mesh, but for our purposes, I think we'll be all right. This one I'm going to taper. I think it'll look a little bit better if we do. Simple deform, taper. Might have to pick an axis, so in this case, looks like it's going to end up being Z. You can see what's going on here when we taper this thing now. All right, we might need to move it in quite a bit. Let's just see what happens. There, that's going to look a little bit nicer, all right? So these aren't going to transfer over to this side over here. We don't have no purpose for that. But let's say we were wanting to transfer things over. We would add a mirror modifier, and we could add a mirror. We'd get this result here. For this side, you would want to bisect it. So we could do that if it was all combined together. I just wanted to point that out. Use the mirror modifier. It'll go a long way. Just get rid of the mirror. There you go. All right, so all of these guys here, we need to go ahead and we need to apply weighted normals to them. So we're going to just apply weighted normals to each one of these. Might help to bump them out to 100. It's optional, but sometimes it helps. And we're not using keep sharps for this particular one. We're going to weight the normal here. And we are going to triangulate all of them as well. So when you triangulate them, check keep normals. Now this is useful if you're going to Substance Painter perhaps, or if you're going to another software like Unreal Engine or something like that. So triangulating is extremely important, but you have to make sure you check keep normals as well. Okay, and so we have more or less just created a high poly model. right, rather quickly. We could, of course, detail it a lot more than this, but that's what it is. It's a high poly. So the base object here, I'm going to name it high poly. We don't actually have to collapse this, by the way. Not required, but I do want to duplicate it real quick, right click, and I'm going to get rid of only the things I don't need. So that first bevel we don't need there, or that last bevel. We don't need the boolean, and the original bevel we need, but we might want to bump it down to like 3. So we could turn off everything else, and this is going to be our low poly, right? And so now what ends up happening is that we can't UV map it appropriately. We need to make sure that we pick a good number here for the, we'll turn these two off as well real quick. We need to pick a good number of segments, in this case 2, where we have this little center line going on, right? And then we can collapse this bevel by hitting Control A over the modifier, hold Alt, and then Alt Shift. You could select all of these super fast and unwrap this thing. How you unwrap these is extremely important. The balance between the edges, where the placement of the edges and support edges go, it can be extremely useful. So Control E, mark seams, there we go. We do want to make sure that this is scaled 1, 1, 1, so press Control A, apply scale, right? If it's not, and go to UV editing, press A, U, unwrap, and you'll see it comes in like so. We want to switch to conformal and don't fill holes, and this should give us a better unwrap. If we hold shift and drag margin up a little bit, we just need a little bit of space in between them, so we have a little bit of padding to the islands when we bake out the textures here. All right, and if you've done all of that, you can right click shade auto smooth, go to the weighted normal, turn it back on. You'll see because we don't have to keep sharp check, it turns all soft, which is good. Might want to bump it up to 100, and then we'll turn on triangulate. All right, triangulate, keep normals. So basically using those same two modifiers. Now we can bake all of this to this object here, but let's go ahead and hide this one. So we're going to turn them all on at this point, and we can bake these to this one. All right, let's set it up. So we're going to go to the shading tab. Yours will look a little bit different. I just put the image viewer up here at the top and made this bigger, but it's basically the same thing. So here's the deal. We're going to go back to just a regular matte cap real quick, and not that that matters, but we want to select the low poly here. Create new. This new material we create, all we're going to do is press Shift A, create a texture, image texture. We're going to create a new image texture. In this case, I'm just going to call it bake, and we're going to do a 1024 for this video. Okay, and make sure it's selected. All right, we're going to go up here, switch to bake. Zoom out a little. Now we got to go to cycles, so we go to the render tab, switch to cycles. Under cycles, you probably want to use your GPU if possible. If you don't see your GPU there, go to edit preferences, and then under system, I think. I forgot what it was. Yeah, system. Pick a GPU that you can use setting there. So once you have that done, go to the bake tab. In this case, we're doing a normal map. We're not going to focus on the other ones, but we're going to do a normal and image texture, clear image, but we want to do a selected to active right here. So we'll be able to bake everything to that selected object, which is going to be our low poly. All right, so this is selected. Let's do it. We're going to hold shift and select all the way through, and then hit control and click here. That makes it the active element. That's why it highlights. So if you don't see that, just hold control and unselect and reselect it. Easiest way to deal with it. Make sure this is selected. All right, so we're all set up for the most part. We're going to bake it real quick. We'll get a number of different errors on this. I just want to show you what they look like. Generally speaking, the ray misses is what you're actually looking at. It's kind of weird how it indicates that is occurring, but it is something you want to take note of. Also, apparently I'm cycling between 0 and 1%. Sometimes Blender does weird things, and it may or may not work here the way I'm expecting it to, but hopefully it will. All right, and it did, which is nice. And we can see it's really kind of weird. All right, so here's the deal. Under the settings here, selected to active, you can see you can use a cage, but there's an extrusion amount. Max ray distance is set to infinite when it's at 0. right? I think it even says that here. Yeah, there is no limit. So the only thing that matters is extrusion, believe it or not. And if you bump it up a little bit, I'm going to set it up to 0.05 and hit bake again. Okay, we haven't checked anything. We haven't changed any of our selections or nothing. So it's still set up properly. We can just bake again real quick and watch it go 0, 1, 0, 1 until it pops up over here. Those greens and oranges, for whatever reason, they're basically just trying to say there's some kind of ray miss occurring or something like that. But you can see now that we've done this again, we do in fact have a super clean bake here. But look, it's really faceted, right? So that's unfortunate. And so how you fix this is you actually have to bake at twice the size here in Blender. So you go to Image, Resize, and just bump it up to higher than you think it needs to be. So I'm going to use a 4096 so we can go down to a 2048. So you got to do double the size basically. You can see upscaling it even kind of blurs it a little. It's interesting, right? Anyway, so we're going to rebake one more time. And we're going to go ahead and knock this out here. Since it's not completely bombing my system while it's baking, I'm going to introduce a vector normal map, a vector bump. I'm going to introduce a color mix RGB. We're not going to connect them yet, but we're just going to add these things. And I'm going to introduce a texture, noise texture, or Musgrave. Let's use Musgrave. Okay. And we'll do a texture, image texture right here. Okay. We're going to plug all these in together here in a second. I just want to see if the bake comes out right. I am baking at 4K though, so it's going to take a little while. Blender's baker is known to be kind of slow, unfortunately. But we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. I'm going to show you how you can take it a little step further. Okay. Curious if I actually start plugging things in, if it would crash. It might. I don't know. It seems like it would. Because it's like mid-operation of baking, so probably not a great idea. We can, of course, detail this thing a lot more than this and have a lot of fun with it. But for this demo, I think we get the idea. You could pretty much click out at this point. That's how you bake your objects to a selected object, right, or active object. The selected to the active object, should I say? Technically, what it is. Whenever this is done, we're going to open and we're going to save this normal map out. You save them as 16-bit PNG files or whatever file format you want. It's a good idea to save them at that. Depending on the software, you might use 8-bit or 16-bit. It just really depends. And in some cases, 32-bit, I think, is another thing, but I don't even know if that's possible. I don't know. I never use them, so it's one of those things. Pretty sure I've seen it somewhere, though, before, that someone did that. All right, and we're going to get there eventually. I just want to show you how downsizing it can increase the quality, downsampling it. While that's going on, I can actually plug this one in. So this is going to be Musgrave to height to height. We're going to plug it into the number 2 here, and normal to normal color 1. Okay. Kind of a weird way of working, but this works, trust me. And this will go into color here. Okay. So we're pretty much set up and ready to go here. The only thing that we can't really do just yet is adjust the Musgrave texture. I mean, we could, but I don't know the values I need to use. We're going to play with them and figure them out. And that's one of the things about working with all these different nodes is a lot of times you don't really need to know what each slider does necessarily, but you need to know like the cause and effect of each slider, and then you'll understand the node. It's just like what is this thing capable of doing and how does it work, right? You need to know that, not necessarily like each individual value. Perhaps you can figure it out as you go along. All right, that was a bad idea doing that 4K apparently. All right. while it's doing that, little side note, this is part of that whole baking series I'm doing. And this is just one of the introductory types of videos for baking in Blender. Now, baking in Blender like is slower. It's not as good as some other programs. The rest of that little series is going to be going into Substance and creating weird situations that you got to solve. Okay, so you can see it did finally finish here, but look, it's faceted kind of, or it's stepping or whatever. So let's do image resize. We're going to bump it down to a 2048. 2048. Click OK. Tab key to get through those a little faster, right? You can see when you downsample it, it actually starts to blur the edges a little bit. It's almost like anti-aliasing or basically the same thing, like old school aliasing, I think is the way they did that. But anyways, so we have that kind of set there. Let's save this thing. Let's save as PNG 16. Go to the desktop. We're going to call this normal map. Okay. And so we save that out. We can open it. Desktop, normal map. Change this to non-color. We need to plug it into, we'll turn the high poly off real quick. Go to the low poly here. Go to material preview. Okay. And so we could plug this normal into here. And we can see we got a mix of these two already occurring. But this is the original bake, right? So we can see what's occurring there. And it's not too crazy. It's not like super good or anything, but it did in fact work, right? And so we can add a little bit of more detail to this by, let's rotate this HDRI real quick. Rotate it. There you go. Get a little better view of it. But we can actually, as you see, the Musgrave texture into a bump and a color 2 here. We can change the factor of the blending. This will replace the texture underneath, just so you know. But we're going to turn it all the way full max real quick, and we're going to go ahead and change the scale here, bump it up. We can change the detail amount, make it rougher if we wanted. Change the dimensions if needed, right? And the last one here. And let's just bump it all the way up real high like this, so you can see it almost looks like drywall, right? Or like popcorn ceiling or whatever. I forgot the name of that ceiling. Anyways, so we'll go with that, but we're going to bump this mix. We're going to bump the strength down, first of all. We're going to bump this mix down pretty heavily. So you can add or inject additional normal map information into one of your bakes doing this, right? So it's pretty cool that you can do this. You have to play around with the settings quite a bit, but generally speaking, keep the Musgrave texture as just a little additional normal to the one you've already baked out. And it should look pretty good. And you could take these and you can blend them before you get to this bump node. So you can have multiple kind of like layered up different textures and stuff all over the place and inject it into your normal maps here, which is a lot of fun. So if you don't need this texture here, you can, mask it out in that area. Potentially, you can even use Blender something like Substance Painter by creating a new texture, image texture. I'm going to create a new file, call it mask, just to give you an idea here. And we could do a color mix RGB, blending these two together with its, well, not with itself. We're going to want the bottom one, I think, to be black. Okay. And so we could plug this into the factor. You can see now it's going to have, you can see it's actually probably backwards. No, it'll be all right. So this mask here, this image we're generating, if we go to texture paint, we can paint on mask. This should be the right one anyways. We can see it's mask over here, change it to black. It's already black, so it should be white then, I think, right? Yeah. I don't know if you can see what's going on, but we can actually start taking it away by using this mask in these areas, right? I was telling some guys that you can use Blender almost something like Substance Painter in a way. And it's true, you can. You have to do it for each individual layer, though it's slower, obviously, but it's doable if you have to, right? Do it. So maybe we don't want that to be textured here. All right, and so this is what's cool about this, because we already have this all set up and going just like so. We don't have to necessarily bake a high to an active again. What we can do instead is, so you can see like here's our bake. So we won't use selection or selected to active. We'll just do a regular bake now, just the low poly onto itself. And we're going to replace the bake normal up here. Okay, and let's not do a 4K again. Let's do a 1024 for this. Resize so it's a little faster. Okay, and so the bake texture is selected. We are over here. We're not doing selected to active. We're just doing a bake of this now, right? To itself, basically. And so if we hit bake, it should combine that texture into the normal map now when it pops back up here. And it should just take a second, right? Should be pretty fast. There you go. And you see how it's added all that texture to it? So anything you plug into your material here will eventually bake out, basically, is the easy way to put it. So, um, except for maybe like advanced effects like parallax occlusion or things like that. But even that potentially could bake to like a height map perhaps, or depth or displacement or something like that. But yeah, so that's it for this one, guys. I think you get a good understanding now of what's going on here. We can bump metallic up so we can see things a little bit more clear. And you can see I missed a spot, but yeah, it's pretty cool what you can do inside of Blender when you start learning the program. This is darker, it's like black or something. All right, so hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll be doing more like this just so kind of keep playing with things. But when it comes to using the Blender Baker, Substance Painter, running into baking issues, if you have any questions about baking, leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, go ahead and leave a like for it, and subscribe to the channel. And I will check you guys out in the next one. All right, take care.